Alright, let's get you set right there. Let's see if you can see me. Oh, there you are. It snowed again last night, about a foot. It's still kind of coming down a little bit. Got the snow plows running out. I got a kind of cool story, but I'm gonna need your help on this one. This one I'm gonna call Pat Rallostone. That's how he signed his name to a letter to Steve Schaefer. Pat says that he was in a bookstore looking for a certain book, and he happened to see one of Steve Schaefer's books called Treasures of the Ancient, and he was reading through it and got quite interested and decided to buy that book instead. After going through it, he wrote Steve Schaefer a letter, and he said that basically that his grandpa told him a story. His grandpa died in 1948, and Pat's getting old at this time, and he wrote a letter to Steve saying basically, my grandpa told me a story before he died about him and his friends, or actually not by him, but of what his friends had told him. Basically, one of his friends called Jake, I'm gonna have to, I'll put it in the description, all these things, but two Indian friends, Jake and his brother, and they, back in the Spaniards, I guess, came in rounded up his village to sell them for slaves down south of the Navajo countries. And him and his brother were able to escape, and were hiding in a ledge, and they found, as they were digging back in the ledge, that they knocked some stones loose. They found a cave. The cave had some amazing things in it, some mummies and some gold and some things like that. And they came back with torches after the Spaniards had left with their village, well, most of their village, and used torches to see these things. Now, I've tried to look for this Pat Rallostone is his name, and I've tried to look for Jake, and then I can't find anything to do with him. He mentions that he came from a city called oh heck, like Lockwood or something like that, and I can't find a place in Arizona called Lockwood. So I don't know if this story is a bunch of hooey, but I'm gonna put it out there for everybody and to look at, and if you have any idea where that you can point me in the right direction, or if you want to be part of this, put it in the comments, and we can figure this out together. Otherwise, we're just gonna chalk it up to a really cool story, but it would be really neat if it was true. I think I should go in before I get too wet. Thanks. Okay, Dan, this next video is was given to you by Steve Schaefer, if I remember right.
Are you talking loud enough for them to hear?
I think so.
You'd think so. What was your question again?
Now you got me.
No, it's still all right. It's all right. Okay. Okay. This next video, um, is about a story that was given to you by Steve Schaefer, I believe, who was given to him by a man named Pat Rallostone, and um, maybe you can shed some light on that.
Well, he signed the email Rallostone with an A, but I some reason suspect it could have been Rollstone. Now, this was apparently, if we'd have done the math on the dates that were given and such, you heard the story prior to 1948, the guy who wrote to Steve.
Because that's when the grandpa died, right?
What's that? Oh, yeah, his grandpa died in 1948,
and he
had told him the story.
So
you have to assume he was 10, 15 years old. So,
at least.
Crud, that's 50 right now. That's 70 years ago. And then add the 15 years to it.
Wow.
So, this guy may still be alive. I don't know. We've never been able to find him. But anyway, he wrote a letter to Steve, and I think this was back in the 90s. It was after Steve had wrote his book, Treasures of the Ancients.
Because this guy actually went to a bookstore, saw the book, and wanted to look at it, and then he ended up liking it so much he bought it.
Yeah, good point. Anyway, he wrote a letter to Steve, and, I could sit here and read the letter to you, but that gets awfully dry. But as long as we hit on some points, and you can feel free to chime in also. But his grandpa was deer hunting with some friends, which were Teos Indians. And they were down in southern Utah.
And the grandpa was from Arizona, actually, though, right?
No.
And he liked to hunt up in Utah.
I think it was Jake that he mentioned.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember.
Sorry.
It's not one of them points that we need to worry about right now. But anyway, he said that his father was out deer hunting with some friends of his who were Teos Indians. And they were up in the mountains up above a city down in southern Utah. Happens to be a place where I used to go deer hunting in my younger years. It's where my dad would take us. And he says one night, they got settled in after setting up camp and ate dinner, and they got to talking around the fire, and one of the Indians' name was Jake Sunagoose. And he told the story about how his grandfather had once been a slave to the Spaniards, and that the Spaniards were in that area, and back in the days when they would come up looking for slaves. And Jake's grandfather was, I think, one of the boys.
I think so too.
That's in the story. But he said that one day they were minding their own business in an Indian village, and they saw the Spanish coming up from the south. And everybody scattered, running in every direction, and the Spaniards came in and started gathering them up, and two of the boys, brothers, took off running to the northeast of this encampment towards some overhanging ledges, and looking, of course, to hide and get away from the Spaniards. When they got to these overhanging ledges, they found one that had more of an unusual undercut where they could hide, and they figured they could get back in there and work some rocks loose and maybe build some kind of a little blind to hide their existence. And in doing so, they actually knocked open the entrance to a cave.
Yeah.
And so they hurry up and pulled the rocks down and slid in and gathered as many of the rocks as they could and stacked them back up to where they, wouldn't be noticed from the outside. They could still watch what was happening by looking through the holes in the rocks, so they were somewhat close to the village.
Yeah, they can see the people getting rounded up, and
yeah, and that's one of the keys in this is knowing where the village was.
So basically, they waited until the crying got subsided, and they moved off and heard it. They did say they were upset in horror because they watched their family get whipped.
Right.
What marched away?
Yeah, they watched the Spanish carry their families off and whipping them and treating them quite poorly, heading down to Navajo area.
Which they sold them to the Navajos.
And when they felt it was safe to come out, they tore down the rocks again and came out, went back to their camp. I would imagine they grieved. And
yeah, but they said when they did knock the rocks down to climb out, they could
at
actually,
that point
they saw some steps going down.
They saw steps going down in, and it looked kind of inviting, but of course they just lost their families, and so they tended to that first and went back to the camp and assessed the situation. Who knows how long they were there. They decided to gather up some wood, go back to this overhanging ledge cave and go in and investigate it. Figure out where those steps went to. So they go back to investigate this cave, and I don't know how long the steps were that went down, but they went down in, and about 50 feet away from that, they came into a pretty good-sized room. And they said that there were 58 Indians
with the full head,
dressed in their finery.
Fineries, that's what they call them.
He said they were dressed unlike any Indians they'd ever seen before, but they could tell that they were Indians. They were perfectly mummified. I don't know whether they were sitting, laying down, what have you. They mentioned that they had metal arms, like swords, and things such as that. There's lots of weapons.
Now, knowing that, from what civilization do you think we're looking at if it wasn't from their time zone?
Well, let's finish with what might have been in there.
Okay.
There might be a clue in it.
All right.
Jeez, dang kids.
Okay, they had swords.
Now I don't remember some of the things. Anyway, they said there was stone boxes, food. There was baskets with corn and what looked to be peas. And there was these boxes that had hoops in the sides of them to where you put poles through them, and, 2 guys carry them over their shoulders, or 4 guys. They said they decided to open up one of them boxes to see what was in it, and they said there were some strange coins. So, obviously they weren't Spanish coins, because I'm pretty sure the Indians would have known what they looked like. Maybe not. I don't know. But their description gave this place more than just a cache site notoriety. I mean, it's got me thinking about Montezuma the First,
who
sent a vast treasure northward with his priests to take a gift to the people whom they had left behind a few hundred years prior.
And we don't know what happened to them.
To who?
The first month.
Well, the priests came back, but 9 of them were missing. And Montezuma I said, "Where's the other priests?" And they said, "Oh, the Great Spirit that translated us into animals so that we could travel faster. He required their souls."
Interesting.
And Montezuma I bought it hook, line, and sinker. These are wicked priests, by the way.
Okay,
There was nothing sacred about them. But the items that they described in this cave was enough to where it had me considering that. The description of the Indians, getting back to your question, based on what they said, I would say that these were either remnant of what Mormons might call Nephites. It could have been the early Aztec or Toltec, because if they had metal swords, they had to have been from one of them groups.
Yeah.
I would have thought Roman, but when they said they were dressed in all their finery, they're probably Aztec.
Which, now, the Aztecs came from one of the 7 cities, the Ciabolta, or...
Come again?
Where did the Aztecs come from?
Their moms.
I've heard that one of the 7 cities of
the
Ciabolta.
Aztecs were... Okay, Aztec. I got to keep my head straight here. The Aztecs came from a place they called Aztlan. And it was a place where the only reason that they said that they had left this place was humility. They had left there in humility. And if you want to read more about that, go find my article on the Colorado Plateau Uplift.
Right. The whole land's changed.
Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I was curious about that.
That's a shock.
I thought they came from one of the 7 cities of Ciabolta.
Oh. Well, no, not necessarily, okay? In the Aztec record, they talk of the 7 caves. Now, a lot of people like to convert that to the 7 cities. The 7 cities' origin is from a whole different people.
Okay.
Most likely beginning with what Mormons call Nephites, Greeks, and or Roman. The 7 caves is not necessarily 7 separate caves. It could be one cave, because based upon the guy that supposedly found this underground city down in the Grand Canyon, what was his name? I can't ever remember.
Kincaid?
Kincaid. He said when he went in the cave that it was like he was at the center of a wheel, and there was these caves going in different directions. That could have been the 7 caves.
True.
According to the Aztec, after they left their home in humility, something happened, and they left their homes, and they went to occupy these caves that they obviously had foreknowledge of. A people had built them and lived in them at one time prior to them. And they stayed in these caves, according to the record, 300 years. Other groups left the caves after 200 years and went south down into Mexico. And those are the people that they encountered 100 years later when they went down as, I've heard it called Mexica. It's basically Mexican. And they're the ones that became the Aztec. The ones that went out and built the city in the middle of the lake. And that's an interesting story, but I would recommend a read of the Aztec record.
Yeah. Okay.
Not much more to tell about the Pat Rallostone story, except that we'd sure like to find out who he was and did he actually exist. Did Jake Sunagoose exist? Was he a Teos Indian? Was he a Navajo? I don't know.
Also,
I do have a very good idea where the Indian village was. And I'm always looking for someone a serious treasure hunter, okay? Responsible. Both feet on the ground. Got their head straight kind of treasure hunter.
So if someone is interested in
go and look for this,
have them get a hold of you.
What's that?
Have them get a hold of you at Tescoro.com or Tescoro@gmail.com. Is that right?
Oh.
So if anybody's interested in following up with this, if they have the means and the time to go about this, get a hold of Dan at his blog is at Tescoro.com, or you can email him at Tescoro@gmail.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
And ask about the Pat Rallostone story and that you'd be interested, because this should be something that might be fairly, I don't know, I don't say
Don't
easy.
use the word easy.
You know? It might be straightforward though, especially if Dan knows a place where the Indian village might be.
The one thing that you need to understand is this can't just be a bunch of fly-by-night guys, weekend warriors who let's go on an adventure. It's don't waste my time, and don't waste your own time. I'm looking for a serious treasure hunter, somebody that has what it takes to get out and consistently chase after something. You might, hell, I got a project down in Mexico I've been working on for 23 years. And most of that work is just getting the right people together. There's dozens of stories up in this area. But the kind of people that would go into the backwoods of the Uintas days on end, consistently, they just don't exist anymore.
No.
And the ones that do are at the end of their period of time.
Thanks, Dan. No,
not you.
I know. I'm broken.
I just meant it's not going to be too many years before they're not going into the Uintas anymore.
Yeah.
And believe me, there's plenty of reason to continue going up there, and it drives me nuts just thinking about the opportunities that I had, but I really didn't have an interest.
Your youth was mainly out in the North Strip and in the desert and looking at petroglyphs.
Well, yeah, mostly petroglyphs, but when I morphed into the Spanish treasure hunt thing, it was more of a curiosity and a need to resolve a mystery.
Which is most of these.
Yeah. Well, I see things that it seems other people don't see. They tell me the story, and I go read the story in the storybook tale. A good example would be the Sugarloaf Gold story. But everybody who reads that story goes with the individual who wrote the story and with his narrative.
Points of view.
And they all end up down at Spring Lake area looking for this thing. And it's just not where it is.
Apparently, if you want to do the Sugarloaf, you can get a hold of Dan.
Well, the problem is when you get to the real place, you're looking for a badger hole. Now, what do you think you're going to find? Take a guess.
You're gonna find a badger hole.
No, not just a badger hole. Hundreds of them.
Stick your hand in that hole.
It's never easy. It's got to be a hole big enough a man could crawl in. But, who knows what's happened to that hole over, almost, in fact, we're hitting right close. We're 1 year shy of 200 years ago.
I would say that's filled up by now.
Could be, very easily. Being a treasure hunter could be fun. It really can. It's the mystery that keeps me going.
I like interviewing you because of your points of view that you talked about. Because your points of view are, the way you look at things are different. And so,
Well, as far as the treasures themselves go, you got to look at it like this. It's either there or it isn't, right?
Right.
Okay, so it's a 50-50 chance. What if it is there? What if it's not there? When you get your information and you go to the hills, the people that we don't want are the kind that will get out of their vehicle once they arrive at the location, the designated location based on the documents, and they get out and they're intimidated by how big the mountains and forests actually are.
Yeah.
And then they start saying stupid things like, what if they've already found it? What if they came back to get it? At that point, you might as well get your butt back in the vehicle and go home. And don't do this. It's not for you.
You've heard me say several times that the reason I like doing this is because I get to go out to the places where things actually happened.
Yeah.
And like when we did the Yellowstone interview, it's like it was cool to sit there because within 200 yards there's a couple mines.
Do you remember the Knoll story?
Yes.
Without going into detail?
Yes.
Well, I just got information from an unsuspecting source that there wasn't 3 cannons, there were 4.
Okay.
It's just a small piece of information, but it came from a different source.
That's the one where you have to be careful not to go into Indian land, so get a hold of Dan. All these I'm going to say get a hold of you because that one, the Indian reservation line is fairly close to where that knoll is, and you have to be careful not to wander onto Indian land.
No, I'm kidding.
Bleep.
But anyway.
So I thank you, Dan, for spending time and going over to the Pat Rallostone. I'm sure there's some people out there who are fairly interested in this one because it is a fun one. This could be a very, very fun one.